Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, almost every time we sit down to do this, we're reacting to something.
Right. There's always a headline, a new policy, a tweet.
Exactly. Some breaking news that dropped an hour ago. We spend so much of our time, and rightly so, talking about the noise of the presidency.
And it can be deafening, that noise. It's all personality politics, the daily horse race.
It really is. But today, I want to do something, well, completely different. I want us to just hit pause on all that noise.
Okay.
Let's strip away the person who happens to be sitting in the Oval Office at this particular moment. Doesn't matter who it is. I want to look at the chair itself. We're going to look at the actual machinery.
I like this. We're going back to first principles. We're looking at the operating manual for the job.
Yes, the operating manual.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are constantly talking about what the president does.
Mm-hmm.
But how often do we stop and really ask, what can the president actually do? You know, legally, what does this rule book say?
And that is such a fascinating question because the rule book itself, the Constitution, is, well, it's shockingly short on the details.
It's tiny.
It is. You can read Article 2, which covers the executive branch, in just a few minutes. It's brief. But the interpretation of those few words, that's a whole different story.
That's where the real meat is.
Absolutely. We have this stack of legal analysis right here. It's titled Executive Powers and Authorities of the President, and it's dense.
That's putting it mildly.
It is. It touches on the Constitution, of course, but what it's really about is the centuries of Supreme Court cases that have had to step in and say, okay, this vague phrase from 1787, here's what it actually means when the rubber hits the road.
So that's our mission for today. We're going to take this incredibly dense legal breakdown and we're going to translate it plain English.
Yes.
We want to map out the hard boundaries of the presidency. And it looks like we've got two main arenas to cover. There's domestic power, so it happens here at home.
Right. And then there's foreign affairs. What happens when the president is dealing with the rest of the world?
And I'm getting the sense that the rules are very, very different depending on which arena you're in.
Oh, completely. It's like playing two different sports. The president has a totally different set of tools and a totally different set of constraints.
Okay, so let's start at square one. The absolute beginning, the core concept, Article 2, Section 1. What does it actually say?
It's remarkably simple. It just says, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America.
The executive power?
Yeah.
That's it. It sounds grand, but it's also so incredibly vague.
That's the word, vague.
It doesn't list things out. It doesn't say the president has the power to do X, Y, and Z. It just grants him the power.
And that single ambiguous phrase is pretty much the source of almost every major legal fight about the presidency for the last 250 years.
I can believe it.
What is executive power? And generally speaking, the Supreme Court has read it pretty broadly. There's key case, Nixon v. Fitzgerald. And in that case, the court basically confirmed that this power isn't just a list of chores. It's not just sign this bill, appoint that person. It's a broad authority to enforce federal law and to manage the entire executive branch of government.
But, and we have to draw a really sharp line in the sand right here at the very top, right?
Absolutely.
The president enforces the laws, period. He does not make the law.
Yeah, that's the golden rule. It is the absolute bedrock of the whole system. Congress writes the recipe. The president cooks the meal.
I like that analogy.
The president's job is to manage the machinery that applies the laws that Congress passes. He's the CEO, not the board of directors that sets the company's rules.
However, and this is a huge however that I think gets a lot of people confused, even though he doesn't write the law, he seems to have a tiny say in how that law gets used.
Ah, yes. Now we're getting into the nuance. You're talking about the concept of prosecutorial discretion.
Prosecutorial discretion. Let's unpack that term because it sounds a little like legalese for I get to do what I want.
And in some ways it kind of is. I mean, look at the case law, something like Davis v. U.S. The logic behind it is actually pretty straightforward.
Right.
The government has limited resources. It's just a fact. You have a finite amount of money, a finite number of FBI agents, a finite number of prosecutors.
You can't be everywhere at once.
You can't possibly prosecute every single person who breaks every single federal law in the country. It's an impossibility.
We need a prosecutor on every street corner.
What?
And an FBI agent in every office building.
Exactly. So because you can't do everything, you are forced to make choices. You have to prioritize. And the executive branch, that's the president and all his agencies, gets to decide which cases get the full force of the government and which cases, frankly, they're going to let slide.
So let me see if I get this. Let's say there's a federal law against jaywalking. It's on the books.
Okay, hypothetically.
And the president says, you know what? I want my Department of Justice to focus all its energy on taking down major bank robbery rings. And in doing so, he's effectively ignoring the federal jaywalking law. He hasn't changed the law, has he?
No, not at all. The law's still there. Jaywalking is still technically illegal.
But if he's not enforcing it, does that law even matter in the real world?
And that is the immense subtle power of the presidency. By deciding what to enforce and what to ignore, the president can fundamentally shape the reality of the law on the ground without ever asking Congress to change a single word.
Wow. Okay, so that's the subtle power. Let's shift gears and talk about maybe the most absolute power. This is section 1 of our deep dive. Domestic power and the concept of mercy.
The pardon power. Article 2, Section 2.
This is the one we all see in the movies, right? The president, usually in a dramatic last-minute scene, signs a piece of parchment and the prison gates just swing open. It feels almost monarchical, like a king's power.
It absolutely is. It's
Right.
a direct descendant of the royal prerogative of mercy. It's an extremely broad, sweeping power. But, and we have to be super clear about this from the start, it is not a magic wand that can fix any legal problem.
And there are rules.
There are very clear, very important rules.
Okay, let's break them down. Rule number 1 seems to be about jurisdiction. Where does this power apply?
The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. It says the president can grant pardons for offenses against the United States.
Okay, offenses against the United States. That phrase seems to be doing a lot of work there.
It's doing all the work. It is the key that unlocks the whole thing. It means federal crimes only.
Federal.
Only.
Only. This is probably the single most common misconception people have about the pardon power.
Okay, so let's play out a scenario to make it crystal clear. Let's say I rob a liquor store in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
I get arrested by the Cleveland PD. I'm charged by the Cuyahoga County prosecutor. Can the president of the United States get me out of trouble? Absolutely not. Zero chance. That's a state crime. You broke the laws of the state of Ohio. The president has zero authority in that situation.
So who could help me?
You'd need a pardon from the governor of Ohio. The president can only step in when you're charged with a federal crime, something like tax evasion, mail fraud, federal drug trafficking, that kind of thing.
So if you get on the wrong side of a state governor, the president can't save you.
Nope. The wall of federalism is solid on this point. So that's rule 1, federal crimes only.
Okay, got it. Rule number 2, timing. This is another one that surprised me. I always just assumed, logically, that you had to be convicted of a crime first.
Right.
You know, the whole process plays out. You have the trial, the jury comes back and says guilty, the judge bangs the gavel, you're sentenced, you go to jail.
Yeah.
And then you start writing letters begging the president for a pardon.
And that is the normal way it happens. That's how it works 99% of the time. But is it legally required? No, not at all. The Supreme Court clarified this a long, long time ago, way back in 1867. The case was called Ex parte Garland.
Ex parte Garland.
And the court ruled that the pardon power extends to any time after the commission of the offense.
Wait, hold on. After the commission, that means as soon as the crime is done.
That's right.
So if I commit a federal crime on a Tuesday, the president can pardon me for it on Wednesday, even if the FBI doesn't even know I did it yet.
Yes, he can. Before you're charged, before a trial, during a trial, or, of course, after you're convicted. As long as the criminal act itself has been completed, the pardon power can be triggered to wipe it all away.
That seems incredible. Why would the system be designed like that? Why let someone completely skip the entire legal process?
Well, the logic, as the courts see it, is that the pardon power isn't just about individual mercy. It's supposed to be a check on the judicial system, or sometimes a tool for national healing.
Okay, explain that.
If a president believes that a prosecution itself would be, say, deeply divisive for the country, or fundamentally unjust or dangerous to national security, they have the power to just stop it before it even gets started.
So the classic example would be President Ford pardoning Nixon.
That's the textbook example. Nixon had resigned, but he hadn't been charged with any crimes yet. Ford issued that blanket pardon to, in his words, end our long national nightmare and stop the country from going through the trauma of putting a former president on trial.
So he short-circuited the whole process for what he saw as the good of the country.
Precisely.
Okay, so rule 1, federal only.
Mm-hmm.
Rule 2, anytime after the act is committed, what's rule number 3? Is there anything this power can't touch?
Yes. There is one major explicit exception written right into the Constitution. The president cannot grant a pardon in cases of impeachment.
Ah, right. So the get-out-of-jail-free card doesn't work if Congress is in the process of firing you from your job.
Correct. The president cannot use a pardon to stop the House from impeaching or the Senate from convicting and removing a federal official. That could be a judge, a cabinet secretary, or even the president himself.
That's the ultimate check on this power, then. You can't pardon your way out of being removed from office.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago that a pardon isn't always this simple binary on-off switch. It's not just you're guilty or you're forgiven. It's more flexible.
Oh, much more flexible. It's not just forgive and forget. The president can use the pardon power to engage in what the courts call lesser acts of mercy.
Okay, give me an example of a lesser act.
The most common one is a commutation of a sentence. This was established in a case called Ex parte William Wells. A commutation is when you don't wipe away the conviction, the guilt is still there, but you reduce the punishment.
So say I'm sentenced to 20 years in federal prison.
Right. The president can issue a commutation that says, look, I'm not saying you're innocent. The jury found you guilty, but 20 years is too harsh. We're commuting your sentence to time served, and you walk out the next day.
So I'd still have a felony record, I'd still be a convicted criminal, but I get to go home early.
Exactly. Then there's another tool called remission. That's a purely financial act.
Money.
Right. If you've been hit with $1 million fine by the federal government, the president can issue a remission to cancel that debt without touching your prison sentence at all.
And what about conditions? Can the president attach strings to a pardon? I'll pardon you, but only if you promise to, I don't know, move to Alaska and never come back.
Well, theoretically, yes. A pardon can be conditional. The president can attach terms to it. The person receiving the pardon then has a choice. They can accept the pardon with its conditions or
they can refuse it. You can refuse a pardon.
You can. If you don't like the terms, you can reject the pardon and stay in prison. It's not forced on you.
That's fascinating. Now, here's a part of this that I think blows the whole thing wide open. We usually think of pardons as a retail transaction, one person at a time. I pardon John, I pardon Jane.
Right, very individualized.
But the source material we're looking at brings up this massive historical example of, well, wholesale pardons.
Group pardons, or as it's more commonly known, amnesty.
Amnesty.
And this is a huge, huge power. The best modern example, and the one the legal analysis points to, is President Jimmy Carter back in 1977. He issued something called Executive Order 11-1967.
This was related to the Vietnam War, right?
Exactly. At the time, there were thousands upon thousands of young American men who had dodged the draft. They had fled the country, mostly to Canada, or they had gone underground here in the U.S. Legally, they were all federal fugitives.
So Carter had a choice. He could try to hunt them all down one by one.
Or he could do what he did. He didn't name them individually. He issued a single blanket pardon for the entire class of people who had violated the Selective Service Act during that specific Vietnam War period.
So with one signature, he just wiped the slate clean for a whole generation of people.
He did. And it's a perfect illustration that the pardon power isn't just about individual mercy for a friend or an associate. It's a major policy tool. It can be used to close a painful chapter in the nation's history or to heal a deep political wound.
Okay, this is so important. Let's do a quick recap of Section 1, the pardon power. What are the key takeaways?
Okay, Rule 1, federal crimes only. The president can't do anything about your state speeding ticket or a local murder charge.
Rule 2, timing. It can be granted any time after the crime is committed. You do not need to wait for conviction from a judge.
Rule 3, the big exception. You cannot use it to stop an impeachment. Congress's power to remove you from office is totally separate.
And finally, scale. It can be used for just one person, or it can be a blanket amnesty for thousands of people at once.
That's the power of mercy in a nutshell. Now, you ready to flip the coin?
Let's do it. Let's talk about conflict.
Yeah.
Let's move into what our guide calls the legislative dance.
Section 2, vetoes. This is something we all learn the basics of in, middle school social studies.
Right. But the actual mechanics of it, when you dig in, are pretty cutthroat.
It's a high-stakes game of constitutional chicken, and it's all laid out in Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution. The setup is simple enough. The House and the Senate both pass an identical bill. It lands on the president's desk.
And as soon as it lands there, a clock starts ticking.
The famous 10-day clock. And it's 10 days, Sundays excluded. The president has exactly that long to make his move.
Okay, option 1 is the easy one. He likes the bill, he signs it, it becomes law. Everybody's happy, champagne corks pop.
Right. Option 2 is the classic veto. He refuses to sign it. He sends it back to Congress, usually with a formal message explaining, I object to this bill, and here are my reasons why.
But that's not necessarily the end of the story for the bill, is it? Congress gets to fight back.
They can try. But the constitutional bar for them to win that fight is incredibly high. To override a presidential veto, Congress needs a two-thirds vote. Not just in one house, but a two-thirds vote in the House and a two-thirds vote in the Senate.
Wow. In today's hyperpartisan political climate, getting two-thirds of politicians to agree on what day it is can be a challenge.
Exactly. Which means, in practice, a veto is usually lethal. It kills the bill dead. But then there's option 3.
The weird one.
Weird one, doing absolutely nothing.
This is what I really want to understand. If the president just lets the bill sit on his desk, doesn't touch it, just stares at it for 10 days and the clock runs out, what happens?
Well, the answer, fascinatingly, depends entirely on one simple question. Is Congress at work or are they on vacation?
Could we explain what that means?
If Congress is officially in session, meaning they are in the Capitol, they are conducting business, and those 10 days run out, the bill automatically becomes law.
Without his signature.
Without his signature. It's as if he signed it.
So, in that case, silence is acceptance.
It is. The thinking behind it is that the government has to keep functioning. We can't have important laws just disappearing into a void because the president was busy or forgot to sign a piece of paper. But if Congress has officially adjourned, if they've packed their bags and gone home for a recess during that 10-day window, and the president does nothing, the bill dies.
It just vanishes.
It evaporates. This is what's known as the pocket veto.
The pocket veto.
The logic is a bit technical, but it's basically this. The Constitution says the president is supposed to return the vetoed bill to Congress. But if Congress isn't there to receive it, he physically can't return it. So he just puts it in his pocket, metaphorically, and the bill essentially falls into a constitutional black hole.
And can Congress override a pocket veto when they get back?
No. Because technically the bill was never vetoed. It just failed to become law. There's nothing to override. If they want to try again, they have to start the entire legislative process over from scratch.
That feels like a very powerful, very stealthy tool for a president who wants to kill a piece of legislation quietly without having a big public fight over a formal veto.
It can be extremely effective. Now, while we're on the topic of vetoes, there's one more crucial rule we have to talk about: the line item veto. Or, as our guide calls it, the no editing rule.
Right, because this makes intuitive sense to anyone who's ever managed a budget.
Yeah.
If you're a CEO and your team brings you a 1,000-page budget proposal, you're not going to just say yes or no to the whole thing. You're going to go through it and say, okay, I like this, I approve this, but this line item here for, underwater basket moving research,
right,
I'm crossing that out.
It seems like a very efficient way to govern. And in the 1990s, Congress actually tried to give the president this exact power. They passed a law that basically said, yes, Mr. President, you can now cancel specific spending items or targeted tax breaks within a larger bill.
And President Clinton used it.
He did. But the Supreme Court stepped in like a referee blowing the whistle.
And what was the call?
The case was Clinton v. City of New York, and the court said, absolutely not. They ruled that the Line Item Veto Act was unconstitutional. It violates a core part of the legislative process called the Presentment Clause.
The Presentment Clause. In simple English, what does that mean?
It means that a bill must be presented to the president as a single, complete package. The president has to make a choice on the whole thing. He has to accept the whole sandwich or reject the whole sandwich. He is not allowed to pick out the pickles he doesn't like.
Because if he starts crossing out individual lines...
If he crosses out a line, he is fundamentally rewriting the law. He is creating a new version of the law that Congress never actually passed.
And as we established at the very beginning,
the president does not make laws, only Congress does. It was a major rebuke.
A huge separation of powers issue. No editing allowed.
Mm-hmm.
All or nothing. Okay, quick recap on vetoes before we move on.
Let's do it.
First, that 10-day clock is very real. Second, what happens when the clock runs out depends on Congress. If they're working, silence makes it a law.
Right. And if they're on break, silence kills it. That's the pocket veto.
And finally, the president cannot use a red pen. You have to accept or reject the entire bill as written.
Perfect. Now let's move from the world of paper bills and laws to the world of people. Section 3, staffing the government.
Appointments and removal. Or, as we might call it, you're hired and you're fired.
This is all about who actually gets to run the country day to day. And Article 2, Section 2 is pretty specific here. It divides all the government jobs into two main buckets. You have your principal officers and your inferior officers.
Which sounds a little insulting if you're one of the inferior ones.
It's just legal terminology, I promise. Think of it as the bosses and the employees. Your principal officers are the big guns. We're talking cabinet secretaries, ambassadors, Supreme Court justices.
The top of the pyramid.
Exactly. And for these people, the president nominates them, but the Senate must provide its advice and consent.
Which, in modern terms, means a confirmation hearing and a vote. We see these on TV all the time. They can get pretty ugly.
Very ugly. But the federal government is enormous. You can't possibly have a full Senate confirmation process for every single mid-level manager at the Department of Agriculture.
It would grind to a halt.
It would. So for inferior officers, the Constitution gives Congress some flexibility. Congress can pass a law that streamlines the process. They could say, okay, for this group of jobs, the president can just hire them directly, or the head of the department can hire their own team. No big Senate vote needed.
That just makes practical sense. But there's a trap here, isn't there? A power grab that Congress once tried to pull.
Yes, this brings us to a fascinating case about the separation of powers. Buckley v. Valère.
What happened?
Congress created the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, which is the agency that polices campaign finance laws. And some members of Congress thought, we wrote these laws and we want to make sure they're enforced fairly. So we, the Congress, should appoint some of the commissioners ourselves.
They wanted to pick their own referees for the game.
Precisely. And the Supreme Court stepped in and just said, stop. Full stop. They ruled that anyone who exercises significant authority under the laws of the United States, basically anyone who has the power to enforce the rules on the public, is an officer of the United States.
Yeah.
And officers of the United States must be appointed by the executive branch, period.
So Congress can create the job, Congress can write the job description, and Congress can fund the job with taxpayer money.
But they cannot pick the person who actually does the job. That power belongs exclusively to the president and his branch. It's a clear stay-in-your-lane Congress moment.
Okay, so that's how you get the gig. What about losing it? Let's talk about the removal power.
This is one of the most interesting parts of this because the Constitution is actually completely silent on the issue.
Really? It says how to hire, but not how to fire.
Not a word. So we've had to figure it out through interpretation and a series of court cases over the years. And the general rule that has emerged is pretty simple. If the president appoints you, the president can fire you.
For any reason.
For any reason, or for no reason at all, you serve at the pleasure of the president.
So it really is a pack your box and get out, you're done situation.
For most executive branch officials, yes. But Congress has often tried to create protections for certain jobs. They try to create so-called independent agencies, where the officials can only be fired for good cause. Things like proven incompetence, neglect of duty, or breaking the law.
Can they do that? Can Congress put that kind of shield around an appointee?
They can, but only to a certain limit. And that limit was really tested in a case with a very, very long name. Free Enterprise Fund v. Public Company Accounting Oversight Board.
That just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it?
Let's just call it the nesting doll case. It's easier.
The nesting doll case. Okay.
So Congress had created this board where the members had for-cause removal protection. They couldn't be fired at will. But here was the kicker. Those board members were appointed by the commissioners of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC.
Let me guess.
And the SEC commissioners also had for-cause removal protection.
So it was a double layer of insulation. A fortress.
Exactly. It was like a nesting doll of job security. The president couldn't directly fire the board members he didn't like, and he couldn't even easily fire their bosses, the SEC commissioners, to get to them.
He was completely walled off from them.
And the Supreme Court said that was too much. You can't do that. It violates the core principle of separation of powers.
Why? Because it insulated those officials too much from the president's control.
Yes. The Constitution vests the executive power in the president. That has to mean something. It has to mean he can control the people who work for him. If you create a system where a subordinate is so thoroughly protected that the president can't hold them accountable, you've effectively stripped that executive power away from him.
So one layer of protection is sometimes okay, but 2 layers is unconstitutional.
That's the essence of it. Now, is there anyone the president appoints that he absolutely cannot fire?
I'm going to guess. Judges.
Federal judges, you got it.
Yeah.
Article 3 of the Constitution says they shall hold their offices during good behavior.
Which, in practice, has come to mean life tenure.
It does. The president gets to pick them, the Senate confirms them, but once they put on that black robe, they are untouchable by the president. The only way to remove a federal judge is through the impeachment process run by Congress.
A total separation. So let's do a quick recap on staffing. Big jobs, the principal officers, need a Senate vote.
Right. Smaller jobs, the inferior officers, can have a streamlined hiring process set up by Congress.
And Congress can't try to hire executive officers themselves. That's a no-go.
A definite no-go.
And when it comes to firing, the general rule is the president can fire anyone he hires except for judges. And Congress can't get too clever by building double-layer protections against being fired.
You've got it. Now, we've talked about the clear rules. Are you ready to enter the gray area?
I am. Let's head into Section 4, the scope of authority.
Or, as Justice Jackson famously called it, the zone of twilight.
The zone of twilight. This sounds dramatic.
It comes from one of the single most important and famous cases in all of constitutional law, Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company v. Sawyer from 1952.
Okay, set the scene for us. What was happening?
It's the height of the Korean War. The United States is in a major international conflict. We need steel. We need it for tanks, for guns, for ships, for everything.
It's a critical war material.
Absolutely. But back here at home, the nation's steelworkers union is threatening a massive, crippling strike. A strike that would shut down steel production across the country.
It's a national security nightmare for the president.
It's a catastrophe in the making. So President Harry Truman decides he has to act, and act decisively. He issues an executive order directing his Secretary of Commerce to seize the country's steel mills.
Seize them, as in take over private property.
Literally take over private companies and have the government run the mills to keep the steel flowing to the war effort.
Wow. Had Congress given him the power to do that?
No. In fact, just the opposite. Congress had recently considered and debated giving presidents that exact power in that exact situation, and they had explicitly voted not to.
So Truman did it anyway.
He did it anyway. He argued that as commander-in-chief during a time of war, he had inherent constitutional power to do what was necessary to save the nation.
And the steel companies sued. What did the Supreme Court say?
They said no. They ruled that the seizure was unconstitutional and they struck it down. But the most important part of this entire case isn't just the final no vote. It's the separate, concurring opinion written by Justice Robert Jackson.
This is where the zone of twilight comes from.
This is it. He laid out this brilliant, simple framework for understanding presidential power. I like to think of it as a traffic light system.
A traffic light. I love a good metaphor. Break it down for me.
Okay, first you have the green light. This is when the president acts with the express or implied authorization of Congress. Congress passes a law saying, Mr. President, please go do X, and the president then does X.
So everyone is on the same page. The two political branches are working together.
Exactly. In this situation, Justice Jackson said the president's authority is at its absolute maximum. The courts will almost always presume that his actions are valid. That's the green light.
Okay, what's next?
Let's jump to the other extreme. The red light. This is when the president acts in a way that goes directly against the expressed will of Congress. Congress passes a law that says, do not do X, or they create a detailed system for regulating X, and the president tries to do something completely different.
This sounds like Truman and the steel mills.
This was Truman and the steel mills. Congress had considered and rejected seizure. Truman did it anyway. He ran a red light. Justice Jackson said in these moments, the president's power is at its lowest ebb. If you run a red light, the Supreme Court is very likely to stop you.
Okay, so we have green for maximum power, red for minimum power. What's in the middle?
The yellow light. The zone of twilight. This is when Congress hasn't said anything. They haven't passed a law authorizing the action, but they haven't passed one forbidding it either. Congress is silent.
So the president is basically out there on his own, acting based on his own independent constitutional powers.
That's it, exactly. And in this zone, it's a constitutional gray area. The legality of what the president does depends on the circumstances of the moment, on history, on tradition, on the urgency of the crisis. It's a real toss-up.
This is such a useful tool. I mean, for anyone just watching the news, when a president signs a big executive order, the first question shouldn't be, is this a good idea? The first question should be, what color is the light?
Is Congress backing him up? That's a green light. Is he actively fighting a law that Congress passed? That's a red light. Or is he out there freestyling in the silence? That's the yellow light, the zone of twilight.
And we saw a really clear modern example of a red light situation during the War on Terror, didn't we? In the case of Hamdan v. Rumsfeld.
Yes, in 2006. This was a big one. The Bush administration had decided to set up special military commissions to put detainees at Guantanamo Bay on trial, and they created their own set of rules and procedures for how these trials would work.
But wait, didn't Congress already have a whole system of rules for military justice?
It certainly did. It's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ. And the Supreme Court looked at the president's brand new trial rules and compared them to Congress's existing UCMJ rules and said they conflicted.
So the president's order went against a law passed by Congress.
It was a classic red light situation.
And so even though he was acting as commander-in-chief, and even though the country was on a war footing after 9/11,
The court still struck it down. It was a powerful statement. The president is not a king. He cannot simply ignore the laws that Congress has passed, even in the name of national security.
let's move on to Section 5 then. This is about duties and money.
Let's start with the duty. It's called the Take Care Clause. It's in Article 2, Section 3, and it says the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
This seems to bring us right back to that tension we talked about at the very beginning with prosecutorial discretion.
It absolutely does. It's the other side of the same coin. On one hand, a case like Davis v. U.S. says the president has the discretion to choose which cases to prosecute because of limited resources.
Right.
But on the other hand, the Constitution places a duty on him to faithfully execute the law.
So where exactly is the line? Let's say a president personally deeply disagrees with a tax law passed by Congress. Can he just order the IRS to stop collecting that tax altogether?
That would almost certainly be seen as a violation of the Take Care Clause. Prosecutorial discretion is meant to be about managing resources and prioritizing enforcement, not about effectively nullifying or suspending laws you don't like.
But that line in the real world must get incredibly blurry.
It is perhaps the blurriest and most fought-over line in all of executive power.
And while the president is busy executing these laws, he has to follow some very strict rules about money, right? The emoluments clauses.
Yes. Emolument is just a fancy, old-fashioned word for profit, payment, or gain. And there are two separate clauses in the Constitution that deal with this.
Let's take the first one, the domestic emoluments clause.
This is all about the president's paycheck. The Constitution says the president gets a fixed salary for his 4-year term. Congress cannot give him a raise during that term as a way to bribe or reward him, and they can't cut his pay as a way to punish him.
And he can't take any other cash from the government?
No, the clause is explicit. He cannot receive any other emolument from the United States or from any individual state government. No side deals, no government consulting gigs, one salary, that's it.
And then there's the foreign emoluments clause.
This one is broader. It applies to any person holding a federal office, and it says you cannot accept any present emolument, office, or title of any kind, whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state without the consent of Congress.
This sounds like the founders being absolutely terrified of foreign corruption.
They were. They had just fought a war against a monarchy. The last thing they wanted was for their new president or their ambassadors to secretly be on the payroll of the King of France or the King of England. No golden snuff boxes, no fancy titles of nobility. The goal was to ensure undivided loyalty to the United States alone.
Okay, quick recap here. The Take Care Clause means you have to do your job and enforce the laws. Domestic emoluments means you get one fixed salary from the government, and that's it.
Yeah.
Foreign emoluments means no gifts or payments from other countries.
Simple, but absolutely vital rules for a functioning republic. Now, we're going to cross the ocean. We're leaving domestic policy behind.
Let's do it. Section 6, Foreign Affairs, and the big one, the Commander-in-Chief.
We said earlier that domestic power is this complex web of checks and balances, the whole traffic light system. But when the president turns his attention outward to the rest of the world, the road gets a whole lot wider with a lot fewer stop signs.
But there's a huge, glaring contradiction right in the text of the Constitution, isn't there?
There is.
On one hand, it makes the president the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy. But on the other hand, it explicitly gives Congress the power to declare war.
It's a deliberate, built-in tension. The founders wanted the speed and efficiency of a single commander for leading an army in the field. You can't have a committee of 535 people directing troop movements.
That would chaos.
But they wanted the slow, careful deliberation of the people's representatives in Congress to make the awesome decision of whether to go to war in the first place.
But let's be honest. In the modern era, how has that actually worked out? When was the last time Congress formally declared war?
World War II, December 1941.
And since then, we've had major military conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, Iraq, Afghanistan. The list goes on and on.
That's right. And the reality is that the declaration of war clause has, for all practical purposes, withered away. Presidents from both parties now routinely deploy hundreds of thousands of troops into active combat zones without a formal declaration.
And what does Congress do?
Congress usually grumbles, they hold hearings, they argue about it on the news, but ultimately, almost every single time, they pass the bills to keep funding the troops and buying the equipment.
And do the courts ever step in? Do they ever flash the red light from Youngstown and say, Mr. President, you can't do this without a declaration of war?
Almost never. The courts have consistently called this a political question.
A political question. What does that mean?
It means they're saying, look, this is a fight between the president and Congress. They have the tools to sort this out themselves. Congress has the ultimate weapon, the power of the purse. If they really don't like the war, they can just stop paying for it. Don't ask us judges to get in the middle and order the troops to come home.
So unless Congress is willing to take the dramatic step of cutting off funding, the president effectively has a free hand to use military force.
In practice, that has largely been the case for the past 80 years. However, there is one very clear exception where everyone agrees the president does not need to ask Congress for permission.
And that is self-defense.
Exactly. If the United States is actually attacked, if there are actual hostilities directed against the country, the president can act immediately and unilaterally to repel that attack. You don't need to call for a vote in Congress while the missiles are in the air.
That just makes sense. Now, foreign policy isn't all about war. Sometimes it's about making deals. So let's move to Section 7, diplomacy.
And this brings us to a really important distinction, the difference between treaties and executive agreements.
I have to admit, I've often heard those terms used interchangeably. I always thought they were just two words for the same thing.
They are very, very different, legally speaking. A treaty is the gold standard of international agreements. It's the most formal and most powerful. The president negotiates it, but for it to become law, the Senate must approve it with a 2/3 vote.
There's that 2/3 number again, that supermajority. Very hard to get.
Extremely hard, but if you can get it, a treaty is incredibly powerful. To understand just how powerful, we have to look at what's called the hierarchy of laws. Basically, who wins in a fight?
Okay, let's play a game of legal rock, paper, scissors. Matchup number 1. The U.S. Constitution versus a treaty.
The Constitution wins, every single time. The Supreme Court made this clear in a case called Reed v. Covert. You cannot sign a treaty that violates the Bill of Rights or any other part of the Constitution. For example, the president can't sign a treaty with Canada that bans free speech in the United States. The Constitution is always king.
Okay, King Constitution. Matchup number 2. A treaty versus a regular federal law passed by Congress.
This one is actually a tie. They are considered to be on the same legal level, so the rule the courts apply is last in time control.
Last in time control.
Whichever one is more recent wins. If Congress passes a new law that contradicts an old treaty, the new law wins. If the president and Senate ratify a new treaty that contradicts an old federal law, the new treaty wins.
Interesting. Okay, final matchup. A treaty versus a state law, say a law from the state of California.
The treaty wins. Hands down. This was decided in Missouri v. Holland. If the federal government signs an international treaty, in that case, it was about protecting migratory birds, that treaty overrides any conflicting state hunting laws. The idea is that on the world stage, the United States must be able to speak with one single voice.
But there's a catch here, right? Something called non-self-executing treaties.
Yes, this is a crucial bit of nuance. Some treaties are not written to be immediately effective. They're written as promises. They essentially say, we, the United States, promise that we will go home and pass a domestic law to achieve goal X.
So the treaty itself doesn't do anything.
Not directly. Until Congress actually follows through and passes that domestic law, the treaty is just a promise. The president can't force states or individuals to follow it.
And we saw this play out in a case called Medellin v. Texas.
We did. The president tried to order the state of Texas to follow a ruling from the International Court of Justice based on a treaty we had signed. But Congress had never passed the specific law needed to make that treaty's provisions enforceable in U.S. courts.
So what did the Supreme Court say?
They said, sorry, Mr. President, it's a nice thought, but without that specific follow-up law from Congress, you can't boss the Texas court system around.
So even with a formal treaty, sometimes you still need Congress to finish the job. Now, what if the president looks at that 2/3 vote requirement in the Senate and just says, forget it, I can't get that. I want to make a deal with another country by myself.
Then he uses the other tool in the toolbox, an executive agreement.
And this is basically like a handshake deal between leaders.
It's more formal than that, but the key difference is that it does not go to the Senate for that two-thirds vote. It's an agreement made on the president's authority alone. It's much easier to get, but as a result, it's also legally weaker.
Okay, back to our hierarchy of laws. A federal law passed by Congress versus an executive agreement. Who wins?
The federal law wins. An executive agreement cannot override a federal statute.
But what about an executive agreement versus a state law?
This one surprises a lot of people. The executive agreement wins. Even though the Senate never voted on it, the courts have ruled that it's still a formal act of U.S. foreign policy undertaken by the head of state. As such, it trumps any conflicting state or local law.
And finally, there's one last foreign policy power that is totally exclusive to the president.
The recognition power.
Meaning?
The power to formally recognize foreign governments, to decide who is a legitimate country and who isn't. And the Supreme Court has said this power belongs to the president and the president alone.
The case here was Zivotofsky v. Kerry.
Right, that's the one. It was about a very sensitive issue. Congress tried to pass a law that would force the State Department to allow American citizens born in the city of Jerusalem to list their birthplace as Israel on their passports.
Which would be a huge political statement,
Yeah.
effectively recognizing Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem?
A massive statement. And the president's long-standing foreign policy was that the status of Jerusalem is unresolved and should be negotiated. The president said, no, I will not enforce this law.
And the Supreme Court sided with the president.
They did. They said Congress cannot interfere with the president's exclusive power to recognize foreign governments. Deciding what our nation's position is on who owns Jerusalem is the president's job, not Congress's. They can't force him to put a message on a passport that contradicts his official foreign policy.
Wow. We have covered a truly massive amount of ground here, from pardons to vetoes to military action. Let's try to bring this all in for a landing.
We've really tried to map the whole machine.
So, for the listener, let's recap the big picture. When we're talking about domestic power, the power at home, the president's authority is best understood as a traffic light.
It absolutely is. It's a complex web of checks and balances. The president is constantly having to ask, is Congress with me on this? That's a green light. Are they actively against me? That's a red light. Or they're just silent. And then I'm in that murky yellow light zone of twilight.
But when the president turns to foreign power, dealing with other nations, he's much more independent. The road is much more open.
It is. The courts tend to step back. The commander-in-chief power is interpreted very broadly. But it's still not absolute. We have to remember cases like Hamdan. The president still has to follow the rules that Congress sets for how the military operates.
So why does all this matter? Why should the person listening right now care about these old cases and these constitutional clauses?
Because this is the difference between the headlines and the reality of power. The next time you hear a news report that says the president orders X, your first thought shouldn't just be to react politically. It should be to ask the structural question.
Does he actually have the authority to do that?
Exactly. Is Congress on board? Is there a law that allows this? Or is he running a red light? It gives you a framework for understanding what's really happening.
And I want to leave everyone with that final provocative thought we touched on earlier about the take care clause.
The deep, unresolved tension between the duty to faithfully execute the laws and the power of prosecutorial discretion.
Exactly. Where is that line? Where is the line between a president choosing his battles due to limited resources and a president effectively ignoring a law he doesn't like?
That is the blurry, contested line where the future of presidential power is going to be fought over and defined.
Something to mull over. We really hope you feel a little more like a constitutional scholar now than you did an hour ago.
It's a complicated rule book, but it's one worth knowing.
Absolutely. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you on the next one.